I'll say also, I don't know exactly the details of the situation, Oliver. And when you say stress and trauma, you could be saying like emotional stress and physical trauma, or you could be saying physical stress and emotional trauma, or maybe they're both emotional. So take what you can from this. And if it doesn't apply, hopefully someone else might take something from this. But one of the things that have helped me really calm down, and I always tell my oldest son, I'm so sorry because when you were born, I was so anxious and just didn't have a good like handle of my emotions. And as I've now have 3 children and years have passed and I've done a lot of self-development work, I have been able to stay much more calm in a lot of situations, pretty difficult situations. And my mom will always say like, gosh, you stay so calm. She would be like yelling and freaking out about something with the kids. And I'm just like, okay, this is happening. But what I learned is that a lot of the emotional or mental stress that we feel can actually be manifested through our own stories we're telling ourselves, sometimes automatically. When something is happening to us, our brain immediately starts telling us a story about it because it's trying to place it and understand it. And that story can completely change how you end up feeling about the situation. So, for example, this isn't just an easy one that we always bring up. You're driving in traffic, someone
Mhm.
cuts you off in a dangerous way, and immediately your brain is like, "That's an a-hole. What a jerk. How dare they?" Now you're getting yourself really mad because like they're wrong and you're right, and but maybe they're having a side effect from a medication and they are not driving well for that moment and they're desperately trying to get off the highway, or maybe they were just really thoughtless in a moment and they're going through a big depression, or you know we don't actually know the truth, so why settle on the story that makes you more upset? Or certain things happen, with potty training with my daughter. There's been times when, where we're trying to get to the bus, we have to get to a meeting right after that, and she goes in her pants right before we need to leave the house. I can start
I
to
call it good timing.
I can say to myself, "Why is this happening? Why is she doing this? This is so annoying. Can't she just get it together?"
Mhm.
You know, or I can say, "Okay, this is part of potty training and these things are going to happen and now I just need to deal with it." And my whole body's response, physical response to that story is completely different than if I went with the first
Mhm.
story. And you could practice this. So and this works even when things are really difficult. We went through a really difficult time with our middle child, and there were times when if I had had to deal with that as a younger person before I had done all this work, it probably would have been very bad. But now I can just kind of hold a little force field of calm and just let myself observe what's happening and just be and say, "Okay, this is happening." And I breathe and I'm doing whatever I can. Sometimes it's just sitting still and being calm for the person who's actually having the problem, and sometimes it's just taking the steps you need calmly to say, "Okay, this is happening." Rather than, "Why is this happening? And this is so annoying," and whatever those stories are. "This is horrible and this is so tragic. What did I do to deserve this? Why me?" Those kinds of things. They
Mhm.
just create a much worse physical reaction. It doesn't actually help the outcome at all. So if that's helpful at all, Oliver, along with your new species, you can hit this from many angles and hopefully feel better.
And I call all of that, what you just said, I call that spiritual.
Mhm.
That's a spiritual way to handle the situation. So imagine what Jillian just described. Imagine you have 5 people in a room interacting that way to a situation. Imagine how powerful and positive it is for each of them. Just imagine, you know. So the spirit field can be expanded. You can expand it. You can contract it. You can destroy it. You can kill it, or you can expand the spirit field. So you have it. You share it. Other people share theirs with you, and our ancestors going back 100,000 years, they believe that's how true community is built, just like that.
Mhm.
And we have always heard, people say, the village, the community. That's what it is. The society. That's what it is. Is people who are of like minds, coming together, and those who are not of like minds, you try to pull them along. That's what community is. That's what being the village is helping one another. And, everyone contributing to the spirit field. So that's what I call the spirit field.
I'll give one last example of how not immediately telling yourself a negative story can be extremely helpful because you're already dealing with a stressful or traumatic situation, and your reaction to it can actually make it much worse. Whether it's the people who are also involved, yelling or screaming at someone, or saying the wrong thing, or upsetting the nurse that now needs to take care of your loved one, or whatever it might be, you can make things a whole lot worse.
Mhm.
So, for example, there was a stressful time that I'd been going through, and running a business is really hard, and I had had some complaints lined up of things I wanted to make better in how I was operating on a daily basis. And one day I really was not feeling good, and I was telling myself, "I can't do this anymore, something has to change." I was telling myself all these stories, and then I said, "What am I doing? Actually, let me just check in and see what's really going on." And I, like, scanned my body mentally, and I was like, "I feel really, really tired right now. Maybe I shouldn't be deciding what that means, and I should just go lay down and take a nap, and I'm gonna call out for the day and just rest." And I rested. I was just really, really tired, and the next day I felt so good, and I was, like, ready to take on the world, and none of those stories I was about to tell myself were actually true. But what if I did let myself believe that? Maybe I would have, like, sent Aston a message that upset him, or, had a bad conversation with an employee. I could have made a mess. All for something that wasn't even true. I just let my brain fill in a gap rather than taking a pause and breathing and saying, "Oh, I'm just actually tired today and I need to rest." And that's all that it was. So, so many reasons why that can help manage stress.